For those of you who have the notes on page 48, if you photocopy this image by opening up your cartridge pad, marking the page because that's the right side, tear it out. Generally you put it in right side down, so it goes through the photocopier like that, and you end up with something like this. You'll notice my gloves. I like to wear cotton gloves to keep my hands clean, give me a bit of slide. So they're just cotton gloves from your local supermarket. Chop the 4 fingers out except the little finger, and it's very good for drawing as well. It keeps the graphite off your hands, especially in summer when you can get a bit sticky. So materials that we're going to use today are watercolours. We've got our white gel pen, got markers. Sometimes your jumbo white pen is good. I've also got white gouache. That's sort of like a chalk based paint, whereas watercolour is a very fine pigment. Also got fine liners, wax pencil. You can also buy wax crayons that are sort of like a pen, and you can sharpen them with a normal sharpener. I've got this eyedropper. Well, this is actually meant for Scotch, I think, but you can get those from the $2 shop, and they're good for sucking up the water. I'll show you what that's used for in a minute. And a click pencil for drawing is very good. Anyway, so in your kit you're given these paints. They unscrew apart. So we have 4 of them. We need to wet them for them to become active. So if you just put, a blob of paint on. So I'm just going to pick a colour to paint with today. What colour will I pick? I think I'll pick orange. I'll make some blue later. So with your colours, you've got, in this dish you've got warm blue, cool blue. I tend not to use the white, and remember that if you want to make colours, you've got your pink, red, your blue or your warm blue and yellow, and they'll make all your different colours. So yeah, just sort of prepare your paint by wetting them and leaving them to soak for about, I don't know, 5 minutes or however long it takes to soften them up. The other thing you might find is after you've put them away, that next time you try to open them, they're really hard to open. So what you need to do is just sort of manhandle them a bit and drag them apart. So the idea is that we're going to mix our watercolours in our dish. Most of the time for garment illustration, you're trying to mix a colour that actually represents a fabric that you're using. So I find that watercolours are probably the best way to actually get good colour matching rather than markers. I know markers are a lot cleaner and easier to use. I would probably use a computer rather than markers. And there's something lovely about actually using watercolour as a medium once you get used to it. So like it says, it's water and water mixed with colour, and so you just got to work it, just sort of get the pigment out, colour the water. I'm just going to get a spare bit of paper initially to play around with my colours, see whether the value is deep enough. So that's quite a pale colour. You don't want your pigment to get so chunky that it looks like acrylic with a watercolour. So if you want your colour to look deeper orange, you would probably go and mix a bit of red into it, and that would deepen the depth of the orange. Actually change the colour of the orange. The other thing with colour is that so that's a good strong orange, although colours always dry a lot lighter than what you've painted them. so keep that in mind as well. And when you're trying to change a colour, often mixing the opposite colour on the colour wheel, so if we were using orange and we wanted to make it slightly less bright, then we would put a little bit of blue in, and that would knock out the intensity of the colour, because blue is the opposite colour to orange on the colour wheel. And most of your fashion colours are in that kind of muddier kind of colour mode. And if you're doing fluorescents or things like that, you actually have to buy inks, so you can't get those extremely bright colours. I'll just show you if I mix more. All colours lead to brown basically, so the more blue you add, the browner the colour gets. So if you want to make brown, basically mixing any complementary opposite on the colour wheel will bring you to a brown, and they're all different browns. So have a big bowl of water ready to clean your brush, have some paper towel ready to mop up any mistakes or excess. So the general way that you use watercolour is you mix your colour up in one of these little triangles in the lid. If you need a lot of paint, then just get yourself a paint palette, or you can even use an ice cube tray. So generally the rule is that you spread the paint so that it fills the shape. It's quite wet, so see how the puddle is like that. If you let it dry out, then it tends to get streaky, and that's when you sort of end up in trouble. But if you want to fade out your colour, you can add water to your brush and then sort of blend it so it gets paler. Like that. Your other option is to actually wet the paper and put the paint on and then blend it out into the water. That gives you a much smoother, but you've got to watch that you don't sort of mess up this part here. Okay, so the example page that I've got just for you to experiment with is, the first one is just doing a wash. So what we would do is just, normally I find painting a shape and then sort of filling it in is the best way to go with that. If you want to soak up any excess, you just dry your brush and pick up the excess paint like that. The thing with watercolour is it's fine if it's wet. That's the general rule. Keep it nice and wet. And so this one will be overlaying the paint, so we're just going to let that one dry. This one is your value. So, if that was our strongest value, then we would, mix some water into another paint palette in the dish and get a very pale one. And if we want something somewhere medium, well, it didn't work out too well, but you can always add paint to it if you want to deepen it up while it's still wet.